Hey, son.
Hey, Dad.
How's it going?
Oh, it's going pretty well. It's good morning.
It's beautiful out. Hey, I got to tell you, do you know what the number one thing is that I hear consistently from clients for the last couple decades of consulting work?
What's that?
I love meetings. I want to be in more meetings. I want to spend way more time in meetings.
Mm-hmm.
I want to spend time reading really dense PowerPoints or have the presenter read them to me.
Right. And I want to have like mostly no direction to it going in. And so we kind of just like see what happens. And I want as many people involved as possible.
Absolutely.
Like the more people in the meeting, the better, and the more productive they are.
Absolutely. And I really like that part where you just spin around on decisions and you spin and you spin and you don't actually make a decision. So you have to come back the next week and keep working on it.
Yeah. And I definitely love meetings that have no food.
Oh, yeah. That's the best.
Yeah. This sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for.
When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth.
In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck.
Greetings, Earthlings.
Hey, Ethan.
Hey, Mike, a.k.a. Dad.
Yes, son.
Welcome back to another episode of the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast, where our goal is to help you, managers, leaders, aspiring managers and leaders,
and all the above.
We want to help you succeed.
Not suck at managing.
Right. And so we're here to give you the tools necessary. Boy, we just got done with a long series on behavior styles.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're all behavior styled out, and we're ready to get back to some of the nuts and bolts.
That's it. Let's do it.
Today, as well as probably the next episode, we are going to be discussing how to run meetings that don't suck the soul out of you.
Absolutely. Our belief at Nash Consulting, and this is from, again, a couple decades of experience, we believe that meetings in many ways are a microcosm of the culture, the work culture.
Microcosm of the culture.
Yeah, like if we, when I was first actually getting into this work, I did a lot of meeting observation. When I was doing my master's thesis, I was in like a fly on the wall, just watching meetings at a couple different organizations.
Did they know you were there?
Yeah, I was hiding under the table. It was
double mirror.
It was kind of creepy.
Yeah,
but it was cool because I was tracking things like, it was actually mind-numbingly boring, I got to be honest with you, but I was tracking things like how much time people spent spinning on decisions, how long it took to make a decision. We tracked airtime and how people were using airtime. I was certainly interested in how meetings were run, how they were organized. And something I've just seen over and over again then and since then is that the culture of the organization just like literally shows up right there in that meeting.
I see.
You can watch a meeting and know so much about what kind of the health of that organization, because you see things like you see respect or lack thereof, you see decision-making processes, you see efficiencies or lack thereof, you see how people use airtime, you see the collegiality, is that the word? Collegiality? Yeah, you see how they collaborate. It's right there. And then when you get into the organization beyond the meeting, you're like, oh, yeah, it's that's all happening. Right?
I see. So it's kind of like a manifestation of the broader culture.
Yes.
Into this meeting.
Yes. And that's good news in two ways. Number one, as a consultant, I collected a lot of data right there. I can know a lot about that organization by watching a meeting. And then here's the cool thing. You can in many ways reverse engineer the culture. Like if you improve meetings, and I have seen this, in fact, I'm working with a client right now where we're right in the middle of this. You can clean up those meetings and add some best practices. Those then leak into the culture. You actually see those things that you fixed or that you've improved in the meetings become a part of the culture brought in a broad way, which is, it's fun. It's fun for us to kind of see that reverse engineering happening in real time.
I see. And so as you were doing all these meeting observations, and I know you still do them to this day, what were the main factors that led to a good meeting, and which I would imagine would also indicate, in a lot of cases, a healthy culture?
Yeah, good question. Let's maybe talk through some of these things.
First off,
Yeah.
I'm going to pause here.
Okay. Pause.
Change subjects real quickly.
Of course.
Folks, we would like you all our listeners out there, to let us know what topics you would like us to cover. I know this is an extremely awkward place to plug
That was a really abrupt change of subject.
Oh, yeah.
Dude.
You know, I just kind of go with it. No, honestly, we kind of have our own subjects, but we want to hear about what topics you would like to see us cover on this podcast, and we'll cover them. Also, just any maybe situations you're dealing with the workplace that you would like to see kind of, how we might handle it. We want to hear those things, and we want to have episodes just based on that. So, if you're a listener out there.
Well, of course they're a listener out there. How else would they be hearing this message?
Good point.
Okay, go ahead.
Anyways, shoot us an email. contact@nashconsulting.com. contact@nashconsulting.com. Let us know what you'd like us to cover, and we'll get on that.
Good.
Okay.
Hey, I have a quick change of subject too.
Okay.
I started playing poker last week.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Monday.
We talked about that on the last podcast episode.
Did we?
Yeah, we did. Apparently, you're pretty excited about it. Right?
It's really embarrassing.
Okay. I mean, hey, I love the excitement, the passion that you found, this new passion that's just brought you alive in the world.
We just made that podcast like a couple days ago, and I forgot that we talked about that. You're right. I'm kind of excited about poker, so let's move on.
Okay.
Whatever.
Anyways.
Whatever.
So as we were saying, we are going to spend the next 2 episodes of kind of diving into what makes effective meetings effective.
What if we talked about your call, bud? But what if we talked about what makes meetings suck at first before we get into what makes meetings great?
Yeah, let's talk about what makes them suck. And I'll tell you what, just kind of looking at some of the research out there on bad meetings and inefficient meetings, there was one study that found, and actually did, observed meetings and did interviews with over 6,500 professionals in the US, UK, Germany. They found that cost of poorly organized meetings in 2019 reached estimate of $399 billion in the US.
What? Wait.
And $58 billion in the UK. The cost of poorly organized meetings. Okay, now that was a study done by a scheduling app website called Doodle that we use. So that's just the cost of inefficient meetings. Furthermore, poorly organized meetings mean I don't have enough time to do the rest of my work.
Oh, 44. Yes.
44% of people said that. They also said that unclear actions lead to confusions in meeting. 43 people said that.
43%.
43%, yes. And then bad organization results in a loss of focus on projects from meetings. 38%.
Oh, you've just described what I am seeing across the board.
And let me tell you one more thing. The average business meeting runs about 1 hour.
Okay.
So that doesn't surprise me. It probably doesn't surprise a lot of people out there. We may argue that might be too long in a lot of cases. Last thing, a poll done by salary.com, 47% of people said too many meetings was the top time waster in the office. Yep. Half the people agree that's the top time waster in office. So boom. That's how meetings suck. But why?
Yeah, let's stay on that. And I'm a real nerd when it comes to consulting because this topic right here actually gets me pretty excited.
I can tell.
I love talking about meetings, and I guess I don't want to repeat everything I've just said, but because they're so powerful in helping a organization get healthier, because everything you just said speaks to what I said, right? If you could fix all that, people have more time, things are more efficient, decisions get made, I have more time to do my job. At the same time, meetings really matter. I just want to throw this in.
They're not inherently bad.
No, because in many ways they're
bad meetings are inherently bad.
Yes, bad meetings are bad. But meetings themselves, if they're done well, are actually in some ways the heart of the organization. This is where people gather. This is where they collaborate. This is where decisions get made. This is where creativity happens. This is where, there's so many important things that happen in meetings that aren't going to happen if you don't have meetings. So I've worked with a couple organizations, and their answer was, let's just stop having meetings. And there's no way you can run a healthy an organization without meetings. So to me, this is an exciting topic because it's so possible to see organizations thrive if you work on meetings. So what you just said, I gotta say, I've done my own very informal quotes around the word research. In trainings, I ask the participants to show me their hands. The number of fingers. I ask for ratings a lot, and one of the questions I always ask is about the volume of meetings that they're experiencing and how that's impacting their ability to get their job done.
Okay.
And so I'll ask people. I'll say, "Can a scale of 1 to 5? 5 represents I'm in so many meetings, I cannot get my job done." And a 1 would represent it's the exact right amount of meetings. They are only helpful. They don't detract from my ability to get my job done. That's the scale. I'm guessing that the average I'm getting is 4.
4
across the board, over and over and over and over again. I look around the room, and it's not a lot of 1s, 2s, and 3s. It's a lot of 3s, 4s, and 5s.
So most people have the feeling that meetings in the workplace kind of suck.
Vast majority. I hear that all the time. They don't just suck, but the meetings themselves are making it are a roadblock to them getting their job done effectively.
Right. Well, that's definitely on par with what some of the more official studies have found as well. And there's been lots of research into this as of lately because I think that people are frustrated.
Yeah, they really are.
Again, people are finding that it's taking away from their job and their responsibilities, and work's getting pushed onto the weekends or into the evenings because the days are filled with meetings.
Yeah. And in the workplace, they're now taking your lunch time, right? We don't have time to meet, so let's meet over lunch. So now you're losing your lunch. As you just described with weekends and evenings, meetings create a work-life balance problem. People are getting burned out. People are going home frustrated. So we've described the mess, right? We probably don't want to spend too much time just knocking meetings. How about if we start fixing meetings? What do you think?
Are we ready for that? Ready to fix them?
Well, we could bitch and moan a little more.
I kind of like the bitching and moaning part.
All right.
That's
fun.
fun.
So what else do you not like about meetings?
Okay, fine. Let's move on.
All right. Where do we start? Let's start where we start in our trainings. If we were doing a training workshop right now, we'd be asking the small groups to be brainstorming all the ingredients of effective and enjoyable meetings. And it's really cool, right? We get a whole bunch of people in a room, and they sit there and they start sort of engineering what would make meetings awesome. What do they want? What do they want to see more of or less of?
Okay, so what I think we should do now is let's break down or brainstorm all the ingredients that we can think of for an effective and enjoyable meetings.
Right.
And let's kind of list them. We might say a few things about each one, but we'll come back and visit each one of these items that we've brainstormed and kind of dig into it.
Flesh them out a little bit more.
But let's just start with kind of a list of all the ingredients in effective, enjoyable meetings.
Yep.
So first one, which seems obvious to me, but maybe not to others, is the facilitator.
Yeah.
Right?
You would think it was obvious, right? Like every meeting needs to have a good facilitator. I can't tell you how many times I go into organizations and they are trying to run meetings without facilitators. And if I have to pick 2 things that are going to make a meeting really, really work, it's the facilitator skills and it's the agenda. So facilitation is key. We spend a fair amount of time training facilitators on how to facilitate. This is the person that's going to air traffic control, that's going to lead us into a decision, that's going to deal with difficult behaviors. And so bottom line for me, guys, is organizations, you need to invest some time and probably some money in getting all your meeting facilitators trained. It's kind of like the old Peter principle, right? People get promoted till they reach their level of incompetence. Welcome to management. Good luck. Welcome to meetings. Welcome to facilitation. Good luck. You're supposed to have all these skills, which the average person doesn't have all these skills.
Right.
Right. So that's number one for facilitator for me is spend some time getting your facilitators up to speed, because that is going to be probably the number one key to running effective and efficient and enjoyable meetings.
Yeah, you definitely need someone there to guide people through the meeting.
Absolutely.
So we'll definitely spend some time on facilitator.
Yep.
That's a big piece right there. And then you mentioned in that same paragraph, agendas.
Absolutely. Yeah, agendas. The frustration, and I bet you the listeners out there can relate to this. How many times have you gone to a meeting and there's an agenda even, and you never get through it. It's a list of all the things you hope to talk about, and you never get through it, and no one is there traffic controlling the meeting, and no one's timekeeping, and you're like, oh, okay, we didn't get to these last 5 things, and some of those mattered and some weren't so important. It's just a mess.
So I get it. It's not just the formality of having an agenda, but you actually have to follow it and use it.
Ooh, yeah.
'Cause I was just told to have an agenda.
Yeah, right.
Check that box.
Yeah, no, mind blown, right? You got to have. Let's start with an effective agenda, which we'll circle back to this later, right? An agenda that really is reasonable, that has time frames on it.
Certainly,
you've added up the, you looked at your hour and you said this is how much time we have for this item. This, of course, is the facilitator's job then to use that agenda and stick with it. And it's a dance between, again, the facilitator, the agenda, and the group. Mm-hmm. So it's really important that agenda works.
Yeah, the agenda really is the compass for the meeting, right? So if you start to get off track, it's going back to the agenda and recognizing, hey, we have these things that we need to cover.
Yeah, yeah. And well, the agenda also, and we'll move on here, but the agenda also is going to have on it all the ingredients of a good meeting. It's this template agenda that reminds you to do all these things we're about to talk about. So it's super helpful, super important. Oh, side note, there's lots of kinds of meetings, right? Just make sure we're clear on this. We're not right now. We're not probably talking about the ad hoc. Hey, let's the two of us get together and have a quick meeting about something. We're not talking about lots of types of meetings. We're talking about your staff meeting, your weekly group meeting, your project meeting that meets monthly. Mm-hmm. We're talking about probably standing regular meetings.
Sure. And hopefully we can get into talking about maybe a little bit like what type of meetings you should have and shouldn't be having.
Good point.
Because, you can run the most effective meetings in the world, but if you still have too many meetings that aren't necessary, you're still going to have a problem.
Yeah, exactly. They could all be great meetings, but you have no time to call your clients or do your other work.
Right. So what else? What are some other effective or some ingredients of effective meetings?
Well, there's, we certainly could talk about some logistical stuff like time, how long they should last, where they should, what part of the week.
So logistics,
the room. Wouldn't it be nice if you got to a meeting and the AV stuff was actually working already and you didn't have to sit there and watch the facilitator struggle with the AV equipment for 10 minutes?
Yeah, and whose world?
Right. How about just a commitment to starting and ending a meeting on time? And that leads into things like passing period, right? How many times are you in a meeting that ends at 10 o'clock and you're also scheduled for a meeting that starts at 10 o'clock and you're supposed to, teleport yourself instantly.
Right.
And you don't have to pee and you don't have to eat and you don't have to make a phone call. And so what that creates is this crazy domino effect where everybody's late for meetings, and it then becomes the culture of that organization for everybody to be late to everything. Mm-hmm. And so nobody can count on a start time because the end times aren't working.
Yeah, it's irrelevant at that point. There's nothing more frustrating than a meeting that's supposed to start at 10 a.m. and it always starts 10 minutes after.
Yep. And then when I get used to that, you know what I start doing?
Arriving 10 minutes after.
Exactly.
Now it starts 15 minutes after.
Exactly. And then the meeting ends late, and this is an interesting piece. I'm sitting there in the meeting, and you're the boss, and you've got a power differential, and I'm the employee, and you're saying to me at 9 o'clock, hey, you guys mind if we go an extra 15 minutes? And I have to have enough courage to say no, because I actually have a one-on-one with my employee in 5 minutes.
Right.
But I'm going to just sit here through this meeting, and I'm going to just not say anything, and I'm now going to, shaft my employee.
Right. Yeah.
It's a domino effect.
Right. And especially if you're the manager in that position saying, hey, is everybody okay? Everybody's okay, right? If we go another 15 minutes. Okay, that's called using your power differential in a fairly unhealthy way.
Right.
Who's going to say, no, actually, that's not okay, even though you've said it's all okay, right?
Right.
So, anyways, another thing I had thought of is meetings with only the essential people. Right?
Appropriate attendees.
I just said there's nothing more frustrating than a meeting that always starts 10 minutes late. I retract that. There's nothing more frustrating than a meeting that starts 10 minutes late and it's just full of 20 people and half of them don't really need to be there at that moment. And I'm one of those people that don't need to be there at that moment.
Yeah,
that can be frustrating.
Well, let's take a couple minutes on that. So we have that where I don't need to be here right now. So what am I going to do? While I'm sitting here during the irrelevant part of the meeting for me, I'm going to get out my computer.
Right.
I'm going to start working on stuff.
Well, hopefully that's an ingredient that we can throw in there as well.
Yeah. But this is what happens. You got the person who, I was working with an agency a couple months ago, and this woman told me, I go to this one particular meeting I think it's every week. She goes, I often have a 15-minute piece in that meeting that I need to be there for, but I don't know when it is. So I'm there for the whole meeting. Can't get my regular job done. So of course I'm going to work on my regular job during the time I'm not supposed to be there. I don't need to be there. So I'm going to work on my computer, which causes other people to look at me and say, oh, I'll get my phone out and I'll start working on my stuff. So it's a domino effect, and all this time wasted because, I should have been able to look at the agenda and seen that I'm on at 9:30 and come in for my 15 minutes and then leave.
Right.
So relevant attendees, we also have people inviting their whole chain of command to the meeting. Right. Like, did you really need all four of you to come to this?
And from my experience and from, looking at the literature, the more people you have in the room, the less productive those meetings often can be.
Yes.
Now, oftentimes you do just need to have, there's a lot of people in the room because that's just the nature of the organization.
It's your staff team or whatever.
Well, it's really interesting. They did some interesting research at Microsoft. There was an article in the New York Times called...
Is that an agency? What, Microsoft? Is that a small startup, or what is that?
Don't diss our clients.
Okay.
There was an article in the New York Times. You should check it out. It was called "The Mystery of the Miserable Employee," and they actually looked into... they looked at groups that had kind of low job satisfaction scores. And they found a lot of really interesting correlations between those satisfaction scores and meetings. Both with one-on-one meetings, groups that had regularly scheduled one-on-one meetings were actually had higher satisfaction scores. But we're not talking about one-on-one meetings today. Just an interesting fun fact. Mm-hmm. But they also looked at larger meetings, and what really distinguished those teams with low satisfaction scores, that those teams with low satisfaction scores would often have 10 or 20 bodies around a conference room, compared to those meetings that often had just 2 or 3 people kind of working on something, brainstorming. So again, the amount of people you have can actually lead to satisfaction and a feeling of productivity in those meetings.
Yeah, and specifically on that, what I'm finding with clients is that the smaller the better. However, even a bigger meeting, as long as every person there is part of that process, you know what I mean? Like, they're part of the decision making. They're there to brainstorm. They actually have a role that's a logical role, as opposed to what sometimes, for example, we have executive team meetings, and I was just with a group last week. If an executive can't make it to their meeting, they invite a proxy. They invite one of their employees to fill in for them at the executive meeting, which doesn't make any sense. No. Now you have a person there who doesn't have decision-making authority, who doesn't know what's going on. So it's the idea of irrelevant attendees,
right?
That can be the problem,
right? I think that's the factor there. It's not so much an issue of the numbers. It's an issue of, typically when you have such high numbers in a meeting, there's a good chance that most of those people aren't really needing to be there or need to do anything.
Yeah. And when we circle back into this, we'll talk about how we use your Outlook and how do you invite and who should be invited. So let's go on. Another ingredient of effective and enjoyable and efficient meetings. Mm-hmm. I think there needs to be, and we'll definitely get to this, some kind of code of conduct. And that's probably not the best term for it, but some agreement, right? Some common commitments. Like this is how we're going to show up, right? We're going to not be using our phone during the meeting, or here's how to disagree, and here's how not to disagree, and some of those basic behaviors that if everybody in the organization or in that particular department could agree on this, it's obviously it's going to make meetings so much better.
Right. Code of conduct.
Yeah, common commitments, that kind of thing.
How about this is more a result of a meeting, but I would still say one of the ingredients is finishing a meeting with an action plan.
Yeah.
Right? It's not really helpful. In fact, you should probably look in the mirror and say, do I really need to have this meeting if the result of it is not some sort of action that people or a person needs to take?
Do I need to literally look in a mirror to ask that question?
Look in a mirror.
Do I have to look at myself?
Yeah.
Go in the bathroom and talk to myself.
And say, Mary 10 times.
What?
I don't know. Isn't that some sort of like spooky thing?
See, Mary.
Yeah.
Is
Turn
that
off the lights, look in the mirror and say Mary 10 times. I just remember this was a movie or a game as a child.
Oh.
Never worked.
It never worked. You couldn't call up a demon? Is that what you're trying to do?
Yeah. Just to see if I could. But anyways, action plans. We're meeting for a reason, and at the end of the reason,
end of the meeting,
things should be getting done.
Yeah, I don't love meetings that you could have emailed me, right? Yeah. And there, it's okay. Side note: it's okay to have those occasional informational meetings because there's something good about everyone being together, hearing the information where you can ask questions, and so that's a good thing. And later we'll talk about emails, right? I don't want more emails. That'll be another day.
Although I'd rather have emails than more meetings.
Yeah, for sure. However, sometimes information doesn't really happen really well in emails, and so it was good if I was in the room to hear it. So, side note, right? But in general, I agree, right? Meetings need to have actions. What we're hoping, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm going to jump in here. We advise that you end your meeting with what we call ABCD. And we'll talk about this later, but A stands for action items, B stands for by when and by whom, C stands for communication items, right? What are we going to communicate outside this meeting? And D stands for decisions. What did we decide? End your meeting with ABCD. That should be right there on your agenda.
Right. One more I thought of, this is kind of out there, but maybe this falls more under the facilitation skills, but a meeting that has a nice balance between focusing on finding solutions and inquiry.
Yep.
Right? They actually find that meetings that are focused too heavily on solutions can hurt, creativity and new ideas because everybody's coming in already expected to have, a solution in place rather than let's sit together and let's ask questions, let's dig in, let's bounce ideas around.
Yes,
right?
Yes. It's a manifestation of that whole, I hate this, hey, if you have a problem, don't come to me with a problem, right? What's the rest of that phrase?
Come to me with a solution.
Right. And a side note, I don't like it when managers say that because the first part of that sentence is don't come to me.
Yeah. Also, if you strip that away a little bit, it actually makes no sense.
Yeah. Why the hell do I have a manager if I can't come to you with a problem?
Right. Well, also, it's just a contradiction. Don't come to me with a problem. Come to me with a solution.
Well, a solution to...
Right. That's the reason why I need a solution.
I don't have a problem if I have a solution.
Exactly.
But the analogy here, it's the same idea, right? Come into a meeting. There's something really wonderful about permission in a meeting to explore the problem, right? To really get into what the problem is. And sometimes we skip through that because, I don't want to be negative or I don't want to waste time or let's just have a solution. Well, I don't even totally have my head around this problem. And we might get a lot of cool creativity going here if we could really explore what's going on.
Right.
So I totally agree with you on that one, dude. And so the balance between exploring the problem, solutions, and here's another balance in meetings, and this should be in the agenda, the balance between information and participation. Right. So small group time, we'll get to that, how to elicit really good ideas, how to brainstorm, how to do consensus.
Yeah.
That's stuff should be happening in meetings because that's why we are in the same room at the same time, is so we can do that kind of work together that you can't do over email.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing is just, and this is more of the culture of the meeting, but still an ingredient, is kind of the safety to express ideas without consequence. Yep, more or less, right? Obviously there's, use your common sense here. But, I've seen meeting cultures where it's so unfortunate because, there's either the leader or the facilitator or someone else in there that makes it kind of a really unsafe environment to do that, to throw out an idea and say, no, that's not right. Or like, that's a stupid idea, Yep. It needs to be kind of a free space.
Yeah, totally right. And that means the freedom to disagree.
Freedom to disagree.
Patrick Lencioni, I always say his name. Lencioni?
Yeah, Lencioni.
Patrick Lencioni, 5 dysfunctions of a team. One of the main dysfunctions he talks about is a group of people who can't disagree with each other.
Right.
And so there has to be the freedom and the permission, and there's not a cost to saying, I don't see it that way, right?
Right.
Otherwise, you get that group think, and you get the power differential, and you all sit there and you don't say anything, and then you'll make a stupid decision, and
yeah, people tend to converge pretty quickly in meetings on, around ideas and a consensus.
They all agree too easily.
Too easily.
Right.
And they find that actually even in healthy cultures. Yeah. It's called being a human being and getting into a group situation. We tend to converge. Side note here, Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel-winning economist, He actually does some consulting with organizations, and he recommends if you're coming to a meeting and you know you need to make a decision on something, that everybody writes down what they think should happen before the meeting starts, right? So they almost have an anchor of what they thought before, because oftentimes people will come to the meeting, they hadn't thought about it yet, and they all converge into one.
Oh, you mean come already with your solid before the meeting? This is what I thought we should do. This is what I thought the decision we should make.
Yeah.
So we don't let go of that too early or too easily.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that. So, yeah, this is great. Let's keep listing, right? Ingredients of effective and enjoyable meetings. What else, dude?
How about just a comfortable space, relatively, and snacks? I don't necessarily mean, kombucha on tap and beanbag chairs, but, there's something about bonding over a nice croissant.
A nice croissant. Yeah. It's, here's a piece we're not going to circle back to, so can we just stop on it for a second?
Knock it out.
We're not saying here, folks, that, stop having meetings because you don't have a food budget. I mean, this is not the thing that's going to make or break your meetings. However, the study that we love talking about, there was a college campus, and there was all these orientation meetings, and there's hundreds of them. I mean, over a couple years.
Oh yeah.
So the social science department said, "Hey, let's do a little study on this." And so what they did was they controlled for almost everything they could. Right? They controlled for the number of people in the room. The room itself was the same room. The presentation was exactly the same because it was a video presentation. So they tried to control for all the things they could. All they changed was food. So there was 3 groups. A third of the groups had no food. A third of the groups had a little bit of food, like your delicious croissant that you're talking about, and some coffee, maybe something like that. And then a third of the groups had a whole spread, like a buffet table kind of thing. So these folks come in, do their thing, have their orientation meeting, and then the students are asked to rate the meeting. And the rating sheets have maybe 10, 12 questions, but it's all about, well, here's the bottom line. The groups that had food, the meetings with food, the presentation was better, the presentation was more relevant, the room was more comfortable. Every single thing about that meeting was better. And nothing on that evaluation sheet had anything to do with food, but everything was better. Now, why is that? What is it about having some food in a meeting that made everyone think they were having a better meeting than they were actually having?
I don't know what it is, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Right? Well, I think people just feel better when they're eating food.
Yeah. Let's count them up.
I don't know the science behind it, but...
Well, let's talk about the physical part first. How about blood sugar? How about hunger?
Sure.
Right? There's that.
Yeah.
How about breaking bread together with people? Right. There's something about our humanness that says, hey, I must be having fun because we're sitting here together eating.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we're good. Look at an evolutionary perspective. We're safe right now.
Right.
We're eating food.
Right.
We're getting our nutrients that we need to survive.
Well, and there's that social kind of, we're having a gathering because we're eating together, which makes this meeting more fun. There's also the fact that this agency that I work for spent some money on croissants for me.
That's nice.
That feels good, right?
Yeah.
Right. So again, this is not the biggest thing in the world, but what I tell managers sometimes is, dude, if it costs you $10 to make people think they're having a better meeting than they're having,
worth it.
It was worth it. Yeah.
Yeah. Man, we've covered a lot here with the ingredients. Anything else that we didn't really mention? Here's one thing: a note taker.
Yeah, note taker. Again, we don't need to circle back to this one. Let me just say, when you note taking should not be a transcript. I don't need you to record every single thing people said in the meetings. And I've actually been to some meetings where I'm looking over there at the person who's keeping notes. They are furiously typing the entire time. They're not participating because they're so focused on their note keeping. It's like, I don't need that. And no one is really going to go back and read all that. You know what I need? I need a recap of the ABCD, right? Action items, buy wins, communication items, and decisions.
Boom.
That's it.
That's great.
Yep.
Well, we should get into that. Are you ready to get into ABCD? Or
oh, sure.
I think it seems like a natural transition there. So because you've referred to it a couple times now that you want to finish a meeting with these 4 different elements, A, B, C, D.
Right.
So help me understand. Is this something that happens at the very end of the meeting, or does it happen over the course of the meeting?
Kind of both, but it's parked at the end of the meeting. So as we're talking about these ingredients, keep in mind that we're in the background right now. We're also talking about your agenda, right? So as we're talking about some of these meeting practices, we are talking about what that agenda should look like. And maybe before we get to ABCD, let's kind of pull the lens back a little bit and say, we've already talked about the fact that it really matters that you have a trained facilitator or a skilled facilitator. We'll get to that later. The agenda itself is going to be your most important tool because it's going to have on it, hopefully in a template kind of version, right? You can call it up on your computer. Well, there's our template. I just need to fill in the blanks. But on our template is going to have a whole bunch of things that are going to happen every single time. One of those being A, B, C, D at the end of the meeting. Now, here's the idea. A, B, C, D, when you get to it, it's either going to be redundant, which is great, that you're going to be recapping something that you've already said. Because you know what? I've seen people walk out of meetings where decisions had been made and not know that decisions had been made. I've seen people walk out of meetings and miss their action items because they were said sometime during the meeting, but nobody recapped it at the end, right? So it's a redundant, purposeful redundancy at the end of the meeting where you go over these 4 things. Or if they're not redundant, we call those prompts. It's like, oh, there are some action items here that we really didn't, specify. Let's do that right now. Or, boy, we spun around this decision and we didn't quite make it. What if we just made it right here at the end of the meeting? So either it's a prompt or it's a redundancy. Action items, that's the A, right? Who's going to do what? Sometimes that's a group thing. Everybody's going to go reread the policies. Everybody's going to do this, or hey, Sally's going to work on this piece of research, and David's going to connect with the other department. So action items, that's A. B stands for by when and by whom, which is always connected to the action item. So who's doing this and when is it going to get done by? You remember our by wins podcast? That fits in right here, right? Same rules. If you're going to miss your by win, you get back and renegotiate it, etc. The C stands for communication items, and this is pretty key. What did we discuss in this meeting that we need to communicate outside this meeting? And who is going to communicate that and when? So, for example, we're an executive team, and we've talked about these different things. We really need to make sure that our staff teams get this information. So I need the 3 of you, right, to get to your teams probably within the next week. And let's bullet point if we have to, right? What are we going to say? What's the message? And what do we not want to say, right? This piece right here, this isn't ready for public disclosure. Let's not talk about this, right?
Okay.
And then D, it's the decisions. What did we decide today? And if we haven't quite made that decision, what are we going to do about that? Are we going to pick this up next time? Are we going to put it in the parking lot? etc. So that's the ABCD. And last thing I'll say about this, I've seen just that, organizations adding the ABCD in kind of a reverse engineering way, cleaned up their meetings.
Okay. Well, I think this piece is important. I think it's important here to linger here just for a second. So correct me if I'm wrong. Every meeting ends with these 4 elements, meaning every meeting ends with the action item. Every meeting ends with the by when, which kind of plays into the action items. Every meeting ends with communication items.
Right. What we're going to talk about outside this meeting.
How we're going to communicate.
Who's going to do it, when they're going to do it. Yep.
And then lastly, ends with the decision.
Reviewing what we decided today.
Reviewing what they decided.
Yeah. Every meeting. And when I say every meeting, yes, there's always exceptions, but in general, right, you have this regular monthly meeting, this regular weekly meeting, this project meeting. Don't walk out of the room until you've addressed all those 4 things. And they should be right there on the end of your agenda.
And what does that mean for the meeting? That means that if your meeting is supposed to end at 10, you don't go up till 10 and say, okay, shoot, we need to review the A, B, C, D, right? It comes down to probably getting back to the agenda, leaving time, last 5 to 10 minutes of the meeting, to make sure you have these covered.
Yeah, your agenda should literally say over on the right column the time that you're going to start and end each of those items. And so the ABCD has its own time. It says 10:50, right? Or whatever. ABCD, right?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, then I think we talk a bit about the agenda then.
Yeah, let's
So we have again just to review, we talked about all the ingredients of a meeting, and now we're kind of getting into each one with a little more detail. One of the first things that we talked about was the agenda and have an agenda ahead of time. Now, my first question to you on that is, what is the appropriate amount of time to give the agenda, right? Like, how much lead time do you give?
Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, that's an important and a big question. Let's talk about ideal versus just real life, right? Ideally, why do I want to get an agenda ahead of time?
Oh, why?
Yeah.
Oh,
why,
well,
why do I need this?
Of course. Okay. Well, so first off, people know what to expect in the meeting. They know if they need to be there or not in a lot of cases. They know what to think about ahead of time. They know what to mentally prepare for. I mean, there's a lot of obvious reasons why you need an agenda ahead of time.
Yeah. Well, remember, and let's bring this back to. Have we talked about behavior styles?
Maybe for like 5 episodes.
Yeah. Right. So remember the processors. Think to talk versus the expedients who talk to think. Right. Processors get disenfranchised in meetings all the time. And I'm actually a little passionate about this. And I'm not a processor, but I feel for the processors because I have watched processors for years get shut down in meetings, not get their time in meetings. By the way the meeting is run, and again, we're going to be getting back to that at some point, but they're not getting their chance. And so part of that is because they show up at a meeting and all of a sudden someone says, all right, let's talk about the pros and cons of this, the 42nd Street project that we're working on over here, blah, blah, blah. And you got your processors who now start processing.
Right.
And they don't even get a chance to speak for many reasons, partly because other people are using all the airtime, but they haven't processed yet. And so they get out of the meeting or they go home that night. They're like, oh, they got all sorts of good stuff they could have said.
Right.
But they didn't have a chance. And that's partly because they didn't get a chance to process ahead of time.
Yeah.
So when I get a meeting agenda ahead of time, it can't say item 3, business, discuss business. That doesn't tell me anything.
Yeah.
It needs to say, what are the pros and, discuss the pros and cons of, so that's one of the reasons I want to get my agendas out to people ahead of time. So your processors have time to process.
Right. Well, and I think that's entirely true and important. But even if you put aside the different styles, right? Even you put that aside, there's just something important about people knowing what to expect in a meeting, whether you are a processor or not. You know what, maybe you need to come with documents in hand.
Right.
You wouldn't have known that ahead of time.
Yeah. Or I've read something ahead of time.
Yeah. To me, and I hate to say that it seems obvious, but I think most people can look at saying, okay, have an agenda is just going to allow for better flow, better productivity within that meeting. The only pushback I've heard to not have an agenda is, we just want to flow. We want creativity. We want this and that. Okay, that's called a brainstorming session.
Build it in.
And you can build that in, right?
Exactly.
Put it in the agenda. This is our free-flowing time that just kind of bounce ideas around and kind of riff.
So let's get back to the agenda ahead of time, right? So here's real life now, right? Perfect world, the agenda comes out ahead of time. Your question was how much ahead of time? I don't have a great answer other than a day or two is fine. I think it's really unrealistic to expect people to have to think ahead a week and know what you're going to be talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I just have been around long enough to see that's not happening. A day, a couple days. But here's the real life. Let's say that doesn't happen. Let's say we get to a meeting and I'm the facilitator and I just haven't had time or for whatever reason I haven't done that. What's my next best thing I can do, right? Well, bring the agenda to the meeting and give people a couple minutes. And I know that's not the same as having, a day of process time, but we've seen that alone help. People get a chance to look through the agenda, know what we're going to be talking about, have time to get their head around that. And I've seen situations where that doesn't even happen. So what's the next best thing? And I just saw this last week. We get to the meeting, the facilitator says, look, before we get going, I'm going to write the agenda up here on the board. Let's take a minute and go through what we're going to be talking about. Even that helps people settle in and kind of get their head around where we're going.
Yeah. Yeah, and I get that. I mean, that's being realistic. The reality of life and the workplace is you do at times need to be agile and be able to work off the cuff. And sometimes just agendas don't happen. I would like to go as far as to say, though, that I think it's a sign if most meetings you're making the agenda on the spot or even making the agenda the morning of before the meeting.
Yeah.
It's especially if you're a whole bunch of people there with a whole bunch of kind of different styles and work responsibilities and things to plan around. Having at least a couple day courtesy to say this is what we are going to talk about and give people that much time to
I agree.
Prepare.
Yeah. Perfect world, and I agree. I wish and one of the things that will help us get there, of course, is having maybe fewer meetings, so I have more time to get my job done.
Yeah,
time to make agendas.
Yeah. I've just kind of seen it being used as an excuse of, we have an agenda and we always make it kind of on the spot.
Yes.
We're just always so busy.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, to your point, I'm going to agree with you even more so. those last minute agendas, especially the ones you're making on the spot, I guarantee you they're not going to be, here's how much time we're spending on this. Here's how much time we're spending on this. Here, that they're not doing that at the last minute. They're just listing a bunch of stuff they want to talk about at that meeting, which is like not having an agenda. So that leads me to let's just look at the agenda, right? So we've talked about, they should come out ahead of time when possible. They end with this ABCD. Why don't we just take a step back and look at an agenda?
I like that idea.
Kind of walk through an agenda. And there's a lot of different ways to do these. This is just some general basic concepts and ideas.
So this is step by step when you send out an agenda, like what ingredients are supposed to be in that agenda?
Yeah, and that the agenda that you send out, the agenda that you're looking at during the meeting, it's kind of your guide as you're walking through this meeting. Again, and I know I said this twice, if you have a skilled facilitator and a really good agenda, you got 90% of it right there. You could have a really great meeting.
Yeah.
Right?
Well.
So a lot of agendas start out with sort of a combination of, if it's not a standing meeting, you might want to include a purpose or a goal, what we're doing today, what do you
mean a standing meeting?
Well,
no
meeting,
chairs?
No, sorry. It's my weekly staff meeting, right?
Okay.
I don't necessarily have to tell you the purpose of that meeting because the agenda will tell you what the purpose is for that meeting, because we always meet. So it's not a meeting where we're having to say, well, today is a decision-making meeting or today is an information meeting. You don't need to say that if you have a regular meeting with your people.
You mean in comparison to other meetings where there's kind of an overarching goal with it?
Yeah, there's a lot of meetings where we're calling a meeting because we need to make a decision about X, Y, and Z. So tell me that at the top of the agenda, somewhere near the top. What are we doing? What's the goal? I don't need to do that for my standing regular, staff meetings.
Sure. But there still will be goals for those regular staff meetings.
There'll be things in the agenda that we're going to accomplish for sure, but you don't necessarily have to highlight the agenda with this is our goal for today. So my goal for today with my staff team is to meet with my staff team and get a lot of get a lot of stuff done. That's my goal That's the goal with the staff meeting. Another thing on the agenda is, again, depending on the kind of meeting, who needs to be there? What I've seen be super effective is you can have almost like in an email, you have the to and the CC. You can actually have a place on the agenda where these people are required. Like these are the people who are, let's say, the decision makers, or they're the leaders of the project, or they're on the team, right? But you can also have a second line of invitees. Right? Like these are optional people. And what we've seen in organizations, it's really cool. If I get one of those and I'm on the second line, I can be there. They would like my opinion. Maybe it's informational for me. I don't have to be there.
Sure.
I can make a decision.
Yeah. Now let me play the devil's advocate just real quick with that one. The only issue I see with that piece, right, of having these required people, which, hopefully those are people that legitimately need to be there, and then the CC of like, hey, this is an option. That I think that's great in a lot of ways. It's kind of painting a picture that, hey, your opinion is valued, although you don't need to be here. Would like you there. There could be like this feeling of expectation with that, right? You get CC'd. You're not required to be in the meeting, and it's like, I really don't want to be in that meeting, but, I got to play this game correctly. Like, I should show up to these meetings I'm CC'd on, right, to show face, to let people know I'm committed, to let people know I'm dedicated. So it might create this kind of weird, almost like corporate politics.
I'll tell you, I see that could be. I've never seen it. In fact, what I've just described is like, every time they've instituted this, it's just been a huge relief because the baseline problem is we're all going to meetings at times that we do not need to be at, and because of what you just described is happening because we're all on the to line. Well, even though I know I don't really need to be here, I'm expected to be there. I better be. That's the problem, and I think this actually fixes that problem, especially when it's a corporate agreement, which would take care of what you just said, where you say, look, we're doing this so you people can opt out. And I want you to opt out if, you have something else you have to get done.
Sure.
Or if you don't really have an interest or whatever. Now, if I need you to be there, here's another thing. We do need your opinion. I'll let you know when that is. The agenda will say, right.
Show up, 15 minutes after the meeting starts.
Come at 10:15 and here's your, so you can actually, a little bit of work up front, right, to kind of parse this out. Who needs to be there? Who's invited, but they don't need to be there? Who's going to be the people that we need at certain times? That takes a little bit of time, but man, you could save hours in the aggregate over time of people's time if they knew when they needed to be at a meeting and not.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what I was saying is, it seems clear that to alleviate that problem of people feeling like they should probably be there to, like I said, play the game right and show face is expectations. Like, hey, trust me, you really don't need to come to this unless you want to. I want you to know you're invited.
Yes.
I'm not going to hold anything against you. No demerits.
Right. If you don't come. It's not going to be a passive aggressive.
Right.
Well, you didn't need to be there, but you didn't come.
This isn't a test.
Right.
And unfortunately, I have friends that I talk to that they always feel like there's some sort of like test or trap that they're looking out for in the workplace like, well, they said I don't have to be there if I don't want to, but I feel like I'm going to lose some face if I don't.
Yeah.
So expectations, folks. That's all it is. Anyways. We won't get too hung up on that.
Yeah, so it's the meeting invite, or who needs to be there, who's invited. It's the purpose, possibly. You get into the agenda now, and just briefly, a couple thoughts. I really recommend that over on the right-hand column, you have the time spelled out. And I know that seems pretty obvious, but without that, there's really no quote permission to say, okay, we're done with this item, or let's move on. So I just think that it's going to help the air traffic controller to have the times listed, and it helps you plan a reasonable meeting, because again, you've seen too many meetings where there's 15 topics and half of those require discussion.
So time, let's back it up to time for each item on the agenda.
Yes.
We haven't gone into those.
Yeah, on the right hand column, each item has a specific time that we're going to start that piece.
Gotcha.
So the small group discussion is going to start at 10:15.
Okay, so again, let's back it up. These are the ingredients to agenda. We have appropriate attendees are invited. That's not really kind of part of the agenda, but that's kind of like the pre-agenda. Who's invited? Right?
Well, I've seen agendas where it's right there. It's both.
Okay, so write it out.
Right.
Next step to consider is everything that's on the agenda has kind of a time, or has the time.
Yep. Over
how
on the
much
right-hand
time is
column.
allotted to this subject.
Yes.
Or this topic.
Yep.
And then what's next?
Well, on that subject, just a side note, consider having a timekeeper. If you got the times over there on the right, consider you have somebody that's not the facilitator, just because facilitation is a lot of moving parts. That person's job is to say to the facilitator, hey, we got a minute, or whatever you've decided. We got 2 minutes left. And I like to actually set that up after the meeting started, right? We're already rolling, and I turn to Debbie and I say, hey, Debbie, would you be the timekeeper? Hey, let me know.
It's always Debbie with you. Who's Debbie?
I don't even know it. Well, actually, sorry, Debbie, if you're listening. I actually know.
We all know Debbies. Come on.
Oh, wait, 3,
okay.
4.
So maybe you just work with too many Debbies.
5.
You really found a niche.
I just thought of 5 Debbies.
Wow.
No, in any event, yeah. So, David, would you be the timekeeper and let me know when there's 2 minutes left? Now, say that in the meeting, right? Because what you've just said to the entire group, we are going to stick to our agenda. I've just publicly said, hey, let me know when there's 2 minutes left. Now, when I get told by David, hey, you got 2 minutes left, then I can adjust, and I can, either finish up in 2 minutes, or I can make an adjustment if I have to, right? So other items, right? I don't know exactly the order of things, but you might want to do a quick icebreaker. I don't think that needs to be on the agenda, but just as a side note, might do an icebreaker. We'll talk about that later.
It kind of has to be on the agenda if you're allocating time and people know how much the meeting is supposed to be.
Yeah, it's a little iffy for me. Sometimes we say, the meeting ends up the first meeting time. It actually says like 10:05 sometimes, and so you kind of use the first couple minutes to kind of mingle and maybe a quick icebreaker. That we'll get back to that, but. Yeah, you might start your meeting with, after that, you might want to do information. It's not a bad idea for the manager, the leader, to spend some time, hey, this is some stuff that's going on. I was at the exec meeting, right, last week, and here's some decisions that are being made. Here's a new policy that's coming out. There's kind of this time that you sort of reserve for the leader to do his or her thing.
So this is what we call the leader's report.
Yeah. They're
kind of being an information curator here.
Information, right? Information they got from their bosses or information they got from another department,
So again, these agenda items don't necessarily need to be in any particular order. Obviously, there'll be ones at the end that makes sense.
Obviously, if you do an icebreaker, it's near the front. This leader piece. I'm noticing that it seems to work better near the front of the meeting. Another thing near the front of the meeting you might do is let's circle back, right? A section on your meeting that is literally about following up on the stuff that we talked about last time, on the buy wins,
right,
on the action items,
following up on previous action items and unfinished business from the prior meeting.
Absolutely.
So this is kind of a follow-up and review period.
Yep.
So yeah, you got, potentially an icebreaker. You have, this follow-up and review from the previous meeting, so everybody kind of gets their bearings. You have this, leaders report where the leaders sharing what decisions are being made, different things are going on, stakeholder changes, whatever it may be. And then I would imagine you kind of get into the meat of it, right? What is this meeting? What do we need to get done and cover in this meeting?
Yeah, so your next items are going to be the business stuff, right? So for example, you might have an item on, we're going to have a discussion on the pros and cons of a certain decision. Or we're going to have another item in that meeting might be, we're going to brainstorm a certain decision, right? We're going to solve a problem together. And again, we're going to talk about facilitation later, but creating a meeting where people have their skin in the game, right? Where there's time for discussion, and we'll talk about brainstorming. You're using different decision-making styles. So these items on your agenda are listed out, and you're not going to try to do too much in one meeting, right? Because if you're going to discuss the pros and cons of something or solve a problem that we're having with another department or whatever, that's going to take time, and you have to think that through. We need at least 20 minutes, to discuss this and arrive at some kind of solution. So you don't have a whole bunch of these. You have a couple, right, of these items that you're going to cover. Probably later we'll talk about how employees and group members get their items onto the agenda, but that's there might be some pieces there where again, Debbie, Debbie.
I do know Debbie.
Debbie and David had a couple things they wanted to talk about, and that made the cut, and their items are listed as well, right?
Sure. So that's kind of the meat of the agenda, those different items that you need to spend time on. What else is on that agenda?
Well, depending on your group, and you guys will decide this as a group, or is this going to be part of your culture? You might want to have a quick round robin. You might want to have a quick FYI time. And that's where, the group members did not have to submit this item ahead of time for the agenda, but they're really quick FYIs. Let's just go around. This might be, hey, our friend Debbie might say, hey, I'm going to be gone next week. So if you have a need in this one area, make sure you go to David instead.
Okay.
David might say, hey, could everyone please remember to put the green forms in the right box? And so it's an FYI, quick circle around. What it's not is, let's all take 10 minutes and bring up a new subject, right? Or let's tell everybody what we got done last week. Those meetings kind of make me want to shoot myself in the head. So it's literally just each person might have a little bit of information to add to tell everybody. It's literally kind of FYIs. Now, if they really had a topic, right? I want to discuss how to solve this problem. That would have been something they would have submitted, and it would have been an agenda item in and of itself. So these are just FYIs toward the end of the meeting. Make sure everybody gets their details, kind of taken care of and sorted out.
I see. Now that might not be relevant if you set a meeting to handle something specific. Right. This is more of kind of what you were talking about, those standing meetings. Maybe it's your bi-weekly meeting or whatever.
Yeah.
Build in that time where people can kind of share some information
real quick.
That's beneficial.
Yeah. In fact, the meetings that we talk about a lot are, the vast majority of the meetings that we're working with are these standing regular meetings. So you really do want to have that time for people to kind of get their take care of their laundry or whatever you want to call it there at the end. And then you're going to have ABCDs, right? That's built right in. You're going to have some time at the end of the meeting to cover those. There's a parking lot, which is just this place at the bottom of the agenda, and it's cool to have that, right? So you're going to use your parking lot a couple different ways. For example, you're in the middle of item 4, you're discussing a certain thing, and someone goes down a rabbit trail, and they bring up this other thing that is relevant, sort of, but you don't really need to discuss it right now. Hey, you know what? That's a really great topic. Let's write that in the parking lot. Meaning, as the leader, I'll make sure that gets onto the agenda next time.
Sure. The good old parking lot.
Or we didn't finish something. That's another option for the parking lot. We didn't finish this, but we really can't afford to bump another thing on the agenda today. We have to get to these other things. So let's stop where we are and let's put a note in the parking lot. We'll pick this one up next time.
I see. So is it implied with the agenda items, right? The kind of the core of what this, what's going to be covered in this meeting? I mean, is it implied that, discussion, brainstorming, decision-making are tied into each one of those? That's not a separate piece?
Yeah. When you plan out your items, I think you said this earlier, which was really good. You kind of want to have a balance. So let's say item 5 is, I was meeting with this other agency. I'm the boss, right? I've been meeting with this agency and I need to tell you a couple things about that. That might be an item. And it's not really a discussion. It might not be a brainstorming time, but I'm going to tell you some stuff. I'm going to ask you if you have any questions. So there's an item, right? But the next item, this is about brainstorming. We're going to solve a problem, and I want you guys to kind of maybe even get into some small groups and talk about this a little bit. Then we're going to get back together. So I just like the idea of sort of mixing into your meeting time for discussion and brainstorming so that it's not one of those meetings that you could have just emailed me.
Right. Right. So you're actually making time for those things.
They're built right in. And this is where I see the problem. I've seen this over and over again. Item 6, discuss, whatever. And they've given it 5 minutes. Or there's 20 more things to come on the agenda. So they just don't give it the time. And then you get your people disenfranchised. You get people that are thinking to themselves, I'm not even going to say anything because, we only have 4 minutes. Or you go into a big, long discussion with no end. And 6 things get bumped off your agenda, and now you're frustrated. So this piece here, this agenda with the times and a good facilitator, man, it's the ticket. I mean, it's what makes this work.
I mean, you get as detailed as, for instance, first agenda item, we're going to talk about whatever it could be. Do you even break down how much time we're gonna spend discussing it, and then how much time we're going to spend with the decision-making piece of it, and how, it's just one
it's just one thing. And again, what mitigates what you've just described is a really good, facilitation skills, right? You as a facilitator know this whole item has 15 minutes, right? So, boy, we're going to give this much time for brainstorming, and I think we're kind of done with that. Let's move into this. So it's not just the agenda. It's not going to carry the whole weight for you, the whole load. It's going to be the facilitator using your situational awareness and your adaptive skills and looking at that item and saying, okay, when is it time to move into decision making? And, we'll talk about this later. What kind of decision are we going to make? Am I just asking for input and I'm going to go make a decision later? Or are we actually making a decision right here today? And side note, a lot of agendas actually have on it which decision making style we're going to use. It's right there on the agenda. Right. So this is what's called a style 3, which we'll get to someday. But, I'm only asking for input. So we only need 10 minutes here. You're going to give me input. I'm going to make a decision later. Or it's a style 5. No, we're going to actually we're going to do a decision together called consensus right here today. It's really great when employees or group members can see what kind of decision-making style we're going to use.
Sure.
Because employees just want to know, am I influencing or am I deciding?
Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about that in the next episode a little bit more. We need to wrap this one up. So just to review, remember, meeting agenda. Here's a suggestion. You start with maybe some sort of icebreaker or just kind of conversation time. Then you have some follow-up and review time, right? Following up on previous action items, unfinished business from prior meetings. And then you have kind of the leader report, right? A chance to kind of be the information curator there, let people know what's going on within the inner workings of leadership. And then you kind of get into your agenda items. Make sure you build in time with those agenda items for, discussion, brainstorming, decision-making, problem-solving, so on and so forth. And then maybe you have a time where it's kind of, anything else.
Great. FYIs.
People get to throw out some FYIs real quick. Obviously not an opportunity for people to share things that can be shared over email or bring up whole new topics to discuss. And then, of course, I think most importantly, you end the meeting with the last 5 to 10 minutes. You spend time on the A, B, C, D, right? What are the action items? What are the by whens, right? When do people need to get this stuff done by? And then the C, what items need to be communicated? And then D, the decision.
Yeah, what did we decide today?
What did we decide today?
Yep. And there's a parking lot. There's time frames on the right. I want to just make a quick suggestion, and we'll, next episode we'll dig in more into some of these topics. But hey, it would be a really cool idea if every quarter or every half year you had an agenda item called our meetings, right? Let's talk about our meetings. What's working? What's not? What would you like to see us do differently? What could we improve? I think that's a really cool stopgap or not a stopgap, but a really good quality control piece right there is give people a chance every so often to talk about how we do meetings.
Absolutely. Well, next time we're going to be covering some more of the nuances with running meetings, including the facilitation and decision-making.
Code of conduct,
a lot of other important things here. So please tune in for that one. All right. Lastly, again, if you have topics you'd like for us to cover, situations you're dealing with that you'd like to hear our opinion on, shoot us an email. contact@nashconsulting.com.
And I want to point out on that one, it'll be confidential, right? If you give us a problem and you describe something, we won't use your name because we don't want that to come back and bite you someday. So we promise we'll be careful.
We promise. All right. Until later. Happy meetings.
Happy meetings.